This special edition of 48 Minutes is a departure from our usual NBA-centric show. Today's guest, Amar Shah, has been my brother and friend for more than 20 years since we first worked together at ESPN. And I don't use the term brother lightly because ESPN really is a family. Ask anyone who spent more than a few months there and they'll agree. At any rate, Amar's journey in the worlds of NBA, journalism, film, television, marketing, entrepreneurship, and publishing is really legendary. In short, this dude is a baller. Welcome to 48 Minutes, Amar.
Bruce, well done, and I'm so excited to join you today. And yes, Bristol bonds everybody for life, and so I'm stoked to continue our conversation, and this is going to be awesome.
Great. Okay, so let's jump right in. What the heck? I knew that you were a force of nature a long time ago, but your string of achievements is truly mind-boggling. And at age 44, your best work is definitely still in front of you. And I really hardly know where to begin with you. So let's go back to Deland, Florida, where your journey really began. Tell us about your family and how you ended up in an area where there probably weren't many Indian American immigrants.
It's funny. Some people refer to Deland, Florida, as Deadland, Florida, back in the day for obvious reasons. But it is a charming town these days. But back in 1986, my parents and I and my little brother moved from Edison, New Jersey, or Old Bridge specifically, down to Podunk, Deland, Florida at the time. My dad bought a Phillips 66 gas station. I think he saw it one time, and initially, he was an electrical engineer, but couldn't stand working for anybody else. So he ended up buying a pizzeria and a convenience store in New Jersey, one called Famous Pizza, the other one called Pizza Land. But then he saw better opportunities for us and his family in Florida. And so we moved down in 1986, and we lived about a mile away from the gas station. So I grew up on a rural dirt road with trailers and all sorts of types of Floridians, both amphibian, reptilian, and human. And, just learned how to see America through the lens of a counter. I call myself a counter kid because that's the way I grew up, seeing our customers and employees and managers all kind of like would come to our house during Christmas, and we would celebrate with samosas and beer. And I remember that was like my introduction to the world of America.
So back in 2018, there was pretty well-known controversy involving Apu from The Simpsons, the South Asian character who ran a convenience store in mythical Springfield. And there was a comedian who felt that Apu's character kind of contributed to negative stereotypes about Indian Americans, but you had a different take, and you used your writing skills to counter that perception, and you did it in a way that made headlines across the country and even internationally. Tell us about what you did and your objectives in doing it.
Yeah, so growing up, Apu was always this sort of like stereotypical cartoonish character for so many people. But he reminded me so much of my dad, not in the negative ways, right? But in the ways that made him hardworking, entrepreneurial. And if you look at the cast of The Simpsons, Apu is probably one of the few, really admirable characters out there. And so, ironically, it was a friend of mine who's also a well-known comedian named Hari Kondabolu, made a documentary called The Problem with Apu. And his whole take was that Apu was this like stereotypical character who like scarred him for life. And, he interviewed a bunch of comedians. It was a one-sided take on a very complicated character. And the fact that he didn't even interview people who actually worked in the gas stations or South Asian Americans who ran these type of businesses, to me, seemed really patronizing in a way. And it made my family look as if we were somehow lower in society, when I feel like what we represented was truly the American experience. And so what I did is I wrote a Twitter thread about what it was like to grow up in the world of gas stations and convenience stores, and really kind of look back at my parents in a way I'll be very honest with you, I never did before. Because when I was growing up, I always felt sort of embarrassed that, my parents were in the world of gas stations, and while other people were doctors, but then as I grew up, I realized what it took to build this sort of world. And for me, I never worried about food on the table. I lived a very lucky life because of my parents. And I saw all of their hard work now, I think, through the lens of me being a parent. And so for me, writing this was a love letter to my childhood, of the experiences that I had. And I think for some reason, it resonated with so many different types of people on all sides of the spectrum. And that led me to really think that the story that I had to tell could really be a universal experience for so many people. I mean, I had no idea that, I would be doing interviews with NPR, or that Time Magazine would call my dad like the real life Apu. I think this thing did over like 10 million impressions on Twitter X way back in the day. And this was, and then I ended up doing that essay for the Washington Post. And so it gave me an incredible platform to tell a story that needed to be told. And I feel very lucky that my parents, got a chance to be seen as heroes to so many people, because it reminded them of their own upbringing.
Okay, so the Washington Post op-ed kind of put you into the mainstream as far as your writing skills and social commentary chops. But long before that, you had what you've called an outlandish belief in yourself. And as you've previously noted elsewhere, you have lived many dreams, and one of them took place when you were a 14-year-old high school student, and you got wind of some NBA activity taking place at your school. Tell us about what happened next.
Bruce, it was May of 1995. I think this was the game. This was right after Reggie Miller scored 8 points against the Knicks. I think this is right after Nick Anderson stole the ball from Michael Jordan in his sort of like comeback. And the day, I think, that Jordan changed jerseys from 45 to 23. So I was growing up. I was a ninth grader at Dr. Phillips High School in Orlando, Florida. And for some reason, our gym was the host of visiting basketball teams, because at the time there was no practice facility available. But I didn't know that at the time. I'm sitting with my friends at lunch, right, studying for a math test. And all of a sudden, all these kids come barreling through the door. I like to call them like they were, Terminator 2, figures coming back from the future to the past. And everybody's like, yeah, the Bulls are in the gym. The Bulls are in the gym. And I'm like shaking my head. I'm like, there's no way the Chicago Bulls, who, even though they didn't win the championship the year before, were still the world champs with Michael Jordan back, right? And so I, along with everybody else, got up, joined, the parade over to the high school gym, because we were in the ninth grade center, and we were divided on the main campus, and for the 10th to 12th graders and ninth graders were separate. So we were all at the gym. Media's everywhere. Police are everywhere. And I mean, think about that scene. Michael Jordan back. And I'm like, I'm trying to get in, not getting a chance to go in. And so, of course, I was always entrepreneurial in nature, and I was taking journalism as a class the next year. So I was unofficially not on the school paper, but I got a pass, which was on a scraggly yellow notepad. I ended up getting inside the gym, and then, Jordan had left earlier, but Scotty, BJ, Phil Jackson were all there. And remember this, I'm wearing a Knicks sweatshirt at the time. So I approach Phil Jackson in this scrum of media, and I'm small enough where I can kind of bob and weave my way through. So somehow I pop up. Hold on, sorry.
It's all right.
I pop up right in front of Phil Jackson, and I'm like, hey, Phil, who's the X factor of the playoffs? And he's like, he looks up, he looks down, and he's like, sees my Knicks. All he sees is the Knicks logo. And he's like, turn this around, expletive. And everybody starts cracking up. Everybody starts, laughing. But then I wanted to tell him, I'm like, look, dude, you played for the Knicks. Why are you ragging me? But I didn't say that. But at the same time, he actually answered my question. Right? He said, Tony Kukoc, and it gave me a really nice answer. But instead of me going to write the story, everybody's interviewing me about my experience, in a sense, getting hazed by Phil Jackson in front of everyone. And then it ended up, Sam Smith did it. It's in his book, the sequel to Jordan Rules. I was like everywhere. I did a correspondence gig with WMVP in Chicago after that. But what that did for me is that it lit the fire that I wanted to be a journalist. I think once you have that sort of like experience, your entire life is trying to find that high. And so for me, the next step was to get a media pass. I wanted initially to go to the NBA Finals, but I got denied. So that fueled me even more. And I was like, why can't I get one? There's nothing stopping me. I'm a legitimate newspaper reporter, even though I'm writing for a high school newspaper. And so what I did is the summer and that fall, I constantly peppered and bugged the Orlando Magic's media relations department with fax machine papers, with like phone calls, you name it, every day, followed up. I think there was a strike or some sort of labor disagreement going on around the time, but I was just every day. That was my routine after I got back from school. So finally, I think they probably got tired of me, and so they relented and gave me a media pass to the Orlando Magic Miami Heat exhibition game in, I think, October 24th, 1995. I still have the media pass even from that day.
Very nice. Very nice. Hey, so, Phil was well known during his coaching career for, handing out books about various topics to different players. So I think, now you're just released your fourth. I think you should send your books to Phil Jackson. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. I'm sure he's somewhere in North or South Dakota on his farm, or his chilling out, around a fire, hanging out. And I think it might be a bad idea.
I think it's Montana, by the way, but same thing.
Yeah, sorry.
Anyway, I have contacts with the Lakers, so I'll see if I can find a way for you to do that, because I just think that would be hilarious if you actually did that.
It would be incredible, because I in one way, probably the greatest coach of all time, sparked my entire journalism career, along with one of the greatest centers of all time.
Which we're going to get to now, because the experience with the Bulls at your high school put you on a path to national prominence in your first encounter with Shaquille O'Neal, whom you're referring to, then of the Orlando Magic. You even appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated for Kids back in 1996 with Shaq. So how did that whole opportunity come about, Amar?
Wow. So in October, when I got the press pass, first and foremost, I had no idea that this was ever going to happen. So when I got the press pass, I ended up getting one of those, those old cameras where you had like the disposable cameras from my dad's gas station, because I was like, I need to capture this. I had a tape recorder with me for my journalism class, and I ended up getting inside the old Orlando Arena, the old arena as we used to call it back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I go into the locker room, and there's nobody there except a couple of reporters, and they're all sitting next to Shaq, who's crouched down in his locker, sitting down. And even as he's sitting, he's taller than me. And as I'm slowly walking towards him, he's always had this like funny sense of humor, but I didn't know it at the time. So he's like staring at me as if like, what the hell is this kid doing here? And then he's like, I don't talk to reporters. And I said, come on, Shaq, I didn't even ask a question yet. I mean, can I just get a couple questions in? And he's like, I don't talk to reporters. He's like, but if you go over to that room, I might talk to you. So I thought he was joking. So I went, and it was like, I think it was the Rodney Powell, who was like the equipment manager. It was his room, right, where just to sit and hang out. So I'm sitting there in this like table. There's a TV blaring, and I'm like, this guy's just making me look like a fool. But as soon as I get up, I see this giant shadow walk through the door, like the door frame, right? And I look up, and there's Shaq in his uniform. He's got he's eating like a chicken sandwich or whatever it was, and then he sits down, and he's like, all right, man, what do you got? 30 minutes later, we're old friends. We talk about everything. We talk about growing up. We talk about girls. We talk about school. We talk about whatever it is. I think he ended up, I wanted him to call Janet Jackson, but he called somebody else. I think it was O.J. Simpson's daughter at the time, who he knew, and left a voicemail. But I really wanted to talk to Janet Jackson. I remember that at the time. And so I got this interview with Shaq, and then the reporters are asking me, like, what was it like interviewing Shaq? And I told them. And I'm like in a haze the entire day. So then I got a photo with Shaq taken of me and him, and he's like kind of like holding me up a little bit. And I was like, all right, I got this awesome picture with Shaquille O'Neal, right? So that was the game. I don't know if you remember Matt Geiger, who used to be
Absolutely.
the enforcer, true backup, if you will. And he sort of invented the hack of Shaq in a way before the Bulls did, where he actually hacked Shaq on his hand and broke his thumb or fractured his thumb at the time. So that was the game that he got hurt. So I didn't get a chance to interview Shaq after the game. He left. So I was lucky enough to land the last interview with Shaq before he got hurt. And so what happened was I ended up writing an article about that for the Orlando Magic magazine. It became a big thing for a while, and I was like, oh, cool. Wow. It was incredible. But what I didn't know is that camera roll that I thought I got Shaq's photo in never developed. There was no exposure. So I had this photo where it's like literally like you can see like this like shiny thing and there's like some abstract imagery. And it is of Shaq and me, but you can't use it anywhere. So I was really upset. So, a couple months go by and I'm like, all right, how do I continue doing this? I was writing for the school paper. I was writing articles about the basketball team, about this or that. And then I found out that Shaq's manager was building a restaurant near my school in the shopping center near like the Publix and the Kmart that was there at the time. So what I did is I went over to the restaurant and knocked on the door, which still had that sort of like brown paper bag, covering up construction.
Pre-opening look.
Mm-hmm. And then the manager, Shaq's manager, who was a guy named Dennis Tracy, who was his I think either college teammate and roommate later on. He opens the door and he just asked me, he's like, hey, who are you? What's going on? Like, I introduced myself, told him who I was. He's like, oh, tomorrow we're going to go to Shaq's house and we're doing the Shaq Claus event. That's the charity event where he would give out toys to all these underprivileged kids. He's like, you can tag along if you want. I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. So got my mom's approval. I remember Dennis Tracy picked me up from my house. He had a 500 SL green Benz, and I still to my day, this is one of my favorite cars. Then what happened? We go to Shaq's house in Isleworth. And Shaq's house, even now, even though he sold it, is this like iconic. It's Shaquille O'Neal's crib. And I'm there. I have lunch. His chef makes me a meal. Then I go with Dennis to the Boys and Girls Club. And, we're waiting. Like all the kids are out there. There's police, and everyone's parents. And Shaq arrives with his cousin. And I was like, yo, and I introduced him and he recognized me. And then for the whole day we hang out. He ends up dropping me home, but first he takes me on a shopping spree at the Orlando Magic Fanatic. I get a new pair of Jordans. I get a pair of Shaq Gnosis. I was like, a kid at Toys R Us. Then he gives me a ride home. So he calls my dad. My dad doesn't believe that Shaq, is giving me a ride. So then we got to my house. My mom looks up and she's like, Shaquille O'Neal's in our house. And he's like the nicest person. Even to this day, my parents were like, he's like the most, he took his shoes off, hung out with my brother and me. We played basketball in our backyard. He autographed whatever we asked him to. He took photos with us. And then he's like, oh, I gotta run. And yeah, that was my holiday visit with Shaquille O'Neal. So that goes by. Then I end up contacting Slam Magazine, and they hire me to write for them as a freelance reporter. So I became the youngest writer for them at 15 years old. And then I was going to Orlando Magic games, writing profiles on different players. And so Shaq and I formed a friendship over that time period. And then I was pitching the idea of the story to different magazines. Then Sports Illustrated for Kids is like, hey, we like this story. Can you write it? So then I wrote it, and they're like, oh, we want to do a photo shoot. They didn't tell me that it was going to be a cover photo. So then Shaq comes to my school, and we do the entire photo shoot in the media center of Dr. Phillips High School. So he rolls up in his Mercedes. Everybody's like, oh, my God. And then, we do this photo shoot where I'm wearing his uniform in, yeah, exactly. I was standing on an apple box as he's kind of picking me up. And then I found out later that it was going to be on the cover. And And to this day, you can still find me on eBay, for different price points of the issue. But the cool thing is I actually own the highest graded issue of the magazine. So
yeah, okay, just a normal story from a normal kid, but really, that's unbelievable. It really is. So okay, so you interviewed Shaq, you became friends with him. You also interviewed Kobe Bryant at some point in time. What was that experience like?
you can see the photo of me and Kobe right over there. So that was really interesting because Kobe, obviously, Shaq left that summer to LA, right? So that was kind of still heartbreaking for Orlando, and to this day still is. But I was still trying to write for Slam Magazine at the time, and so they had this. You probably know that iconic Slam Magazine cover with all the 1996 rookies on it: Steve Nash, Kobe, Iverson. I don't think Iverson was there, but like the rest, like it's iconic. So what people don't know is that photo shoot took place in Orlando, Florida, and all the rookies were at this orientation. So my friend and I, like all juniors in high school, decided to, forget going to class, and we ended up bunking, as the kids in India say. And I went to the hotel where they were all at. So we're walking around, bump into Ray Allen, bump into Jermaine O'Neal, bump into Steve Nash. And again, these guys are closer to my age than they are to other people, right? Because I'm 16 or 17, 16 at the time, and most of them are like either early 20s or late teens. And then we bump into Kobe Bryant. Kobe at the time, I think, had broken his thumb. So he's still endorsed by Adidas at the time. So we started talking because he's 2 years older than I am. And we hit it off. We talked for about 30 minutes. And he took a photo with him, hung out, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. He was like the most down-to-earth person that I knew. 2 years later, the LA Lakers, including Shaq and Kobe, end up practicing in our gym when I'm a senior. So this is 1998. And so I ended up reuniting with Shaq, right? And then I ended up talking with Kobe, and he remembered me from that time period. And then we started talking, for about 20, 30 minutes. After everyone's leaving, we're still chatting about life. And he's like one of those, he wasn't like the Mamba at this point. He's probably 20 years old. He's still trying to get his feet wet. But you knew that this was coming. This force of nature was to be. But then he's also a kid. And so we were just hung out. And he ended up giving me his practice jersey, which I think is that purple jersey. And he signed it for me. So I gave it to my brother, who has it. But that was awesome. And, I ended up seeing him when I ran social media for the Magic. We went to the NBA LA festivities that were going on, or the team meetings. And he was there with Phil Knight, and they were talking about him like post-retirement. And it was incredible to see what he was doing, especially on the writing side. But, unfortunately, a couple of years later, Kobe passes away. And I think all of us were impacted in so many different manifesting ways. And I think for me, the Mamba mentality inspired me to really work and write that book series called Play the Game, which you see behind me. And that first book, the Hoop Con, one of the characters is wearing his jersey. And obviously, like, all the jerseys have his number on it, except for the 33. And so that book is almost like a tribute to Kobe, and it also is inspired by what he did and the impact that he had on me.
All right, we're going to take a real quick break here because we're going to now move on to college. So we'll be back in just a second to take us to the Gainesville area. Okay, welcome back to the special edition of 48 Minutes. I'm here with Amar Shah, the author of 4 books. We're going to talk about his books in a few minutes. So after high school, you go to the University of Florida, then you're out into the world where you're achieving success across many platforms. In short, one of the titles of your book says, I wish I was a baller. Dude, you're a baller. You don't have to worry about that. But in high school, you didn't really feel like a baller. So let's fast forward 30 years later, and your 4th and newest book, I Wish I Was a Baller, draws on your teenage years and brings an inspirational story to a new generation of kids. So what message does an old man of 44 share with these kids?
45 now.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Would rather be 44, but you know what? I'm gonna embrace 45. The message that I have, I think the reason why I wrote this book, and it's a book about being patient, right? But also striving and persevering and being tenacious and going after the things that you want. And it's also about finding your voice. And I think for me, I always wanted to be a basketball player. I still dream of getting a growth spurt and somehow playing in the NBA. I got some inspiration from Venus Williams and the other day when she was back on the court. But I knew at a certain point I wasn't going to make the school basketball team. But there's nothing that gave me such joy as being near the game. And the closest that I got, and the other passion that I had, was storytelling and being a journalist. And I think this book is all about finding your true passion and your true vision of the things that you want to do. It's also about making mistakes and learning how to bounce back. And I knew that the year that I went through when I was 15 and 14 was universal. It didn't matter if it was in the 90s or the 2000s or the 70s. I knew that especially now that I'm a dad with 2 kids, I wanted to create something for them where they can see the lessons that their dad went through and can inspire them to chase their dreams. So what was really cool is that this book is like a graphic novel. And even the way that it got made was crazy, right? Like I wrote this after I started writing the book when I was 35, after my son was born. But the idea got planted even earlier in like 2008 when I saw this movie with Richard Linklater directed called Me and Orson Welles, which was about this like fictional kid who's like a senior who ends up being casted in one of Orson Welles' plays. And it's all about how, he learned in a week about life. And so I was like, that inspired me. I'm like, I knew Shaq in the same way, except mine was a real story. So from 2008 all the way to, I would say, 2020, I had to write the book. And so for those 5 years before that, during the pandemic, my project was to get this book written before I was 40. And I got that done. But I wrote it as a 100,000 word young adult memoir. It was more American Pie than it was, basically for a scholastic audience. So I ended up finishing the book. And when you talk about rejection, I got rejected by, I think, more than 20 agents before I even landed one. But I did. I kept like an Excel sheet of all the rejections. I think Matumbo would be proud with how many rejections I had. But it was inspirational for me because as soon as I got that one yes, we got the book then to a bunch of publishers. I got all no's from everybody. The only like hesitation and curiosity came from Scholastic. And there was an editor there named Matt Ringler who actually edited Amari Stoudemire's kid book series from back in the day called Stat. And he's like, look, I love your voice, but this audience, the book skews a little bit older, but I want you to try to write a middle school basketball series. So I ended up trying out writing a couple chapters and they loved it. That's how I got the book deal for the Play the Game series. But Wish I Was a Baller was back with us and we didn't really know what to do with it. And my agent, her name was Jazz Perry, said, look, I'm looking at this as a graphic novel. I've always seen it this way. I have an amazing illustrator that I want to team you up with. So she teamed me up with a guy named Rashad Duquette. He's this incredible artist. He teaches at the Savannah School of Design. And we collaborated together and he made some panels. I put a script together and then we resubmitted it. And then my editor from Scholastic ended up buying it. And what was once a written memoir was now a graphic novel. And so over the last 3 years, we worked on putting that together. I think he drew over 1,000 panels. We had this sort of like big boy Andre 3000 collaboration between me and Rashad. And lo and behold, it's now out on bookshelves. It's, if your kid has a Scholastic book fair, I just found out that it's like one of the main books on the flyer. So dreams do come true. You just got to be patient. And I think kids will take that message from the book itself, is that go after your dreams, be patient, and you'll get what you want.
It's so funny. I want to pick up on that because I first knew you in 2004 when you came to ESPN as a PA trainee, a production assistant trainee, your dream job at the time. And when I used to meet with all the new PA trainees, and I probably had this conversation with you, I always told them they needed to be aggressive but patient. And that is really hard to do because aggressive people tend not to be patient, and patient people sometimes aren't always as aggressive as they need to be. But for those who crack that code, they're ready for anything, both at work and outside of work. So, what are your thoughts on trying to balance ambition with reality?
Oh, it's something that I'm still trying to manage, and I think that's the thing, is like to get to that equilibrium point of balancing, sort of Eastern and Western tradition together, where it's like let things happen instead of trying to make things happen. And I think as a kid who kind of blends both cultures, it's something that I've had to deal with my entire life, right? Like I know that I've had to like be as aggressive and as sort of persistent and tenacious as possible, but at the same time, I've got to let the audience come to me. I've got to let the process play out. And I think once you kind of match that equilibrium, and it's very hard to do, really amazing things blossom. And I think even at ESPN, I had to be patient, right? Like I had all of these like crazy ideas for highlights and for segments. And it took a while, but finally, like I got some buy-in from producers like you, from talent like Neil Everett from back in the day, and we were able to put some really fun things together. And even like writing for ESPN.com and for Page Two, I had to be patient. I had to find the right story. I had to wait. But guess what? Things happen when you put them into play, and I think that's the thing. You create your own luck, and I mean that in a sense that if you work hard at something else is going to come and help you out accomplish your dreams.
PA trainees at ESPN were the most scrutinized people in the entire studio production department. Most of the time, you had to be perfect just to be considered average. I mean, and you were the youngest people in the place. Most of you were right out of school. So what were the most important lessons that you learned in such a demanding environment?
Oh, being at Bristol right after college was like being at Harvard Business for school for sports media. It was Hunger Games, right? You were back in the day, you were either after 6 months, they voted on you. We had to impress coordinating producers and senior coordinating producers like yourself after 6 months because there's a vote. And if you don't pass the vote, you're not kept. You don't get a full-time job. And so there was a pressure cooker always to perform. And yeah, I mean, you had to be accurate. You had to be creative. You had to be so many different aspects of what they were looking for. And look, did I make mistakes when it came to accuracy? Oh yeah, that was, because I was always in a rush. I was always trying to make things happen. And sometimes when you do that, you don't take that second to check things over. And yeah, the worst thing to do is having to reproduce a segment after it's all recorded, the fixes as they call it. And yeah, nobody's happy with that. But I ended up getting kept as a PA. And I think that was, I look back on it, and if I learned how to survive ESPN right out of school and living in Bristol, you can make it anywhere. And for me, it was a school of hard knocks, but it was the best graduate school I could ever imagine.
So after your time there as a PA, you moved into marketing with ESPN and Disney in LA, then the NFL Network. You spent time at the now defunct MySpace. You worked for the Orlando Apollos football team with a Florida Gators icon that you must have idolized, Steve Spurrier. You started and ran 2 production companies, and along the way, you won multiple Emmy Awards for your work. You also wrote, produced, and directed the Patel Motel Story, which was screened at some of the most prestigious film festivals in the country, and you've been a successful author of children's books. So, Amar, is there any platform that you haven't pivoted towards in your career?
I've been lucky enough to tell stories on multiple platforms for multiple audiences. And, for me, the big thing that I want to do is make a feature film. That's the next step. I've done a short, I've done a documentary short, but a feature film is something that I really want to do. And at some point, I know I'll direct and produce one, but I'm enjoying the process along the way because I love the fact that I can write for so many people and inspire so many people.
I am so fascinated by the Patel story. I mean, was there something about the motel industry that was such a great fit for a group of immigrants from the same region of India, most of whom shared the same last name? I mean, was there something in the Gujarati culture that made so many of them gravitate towards the motel industry?
Yeah, I think what it was, and it was for me, it's a very personal story because as someone, I grew up in the gas station industry, right? But all my cousins and close friends all grew up in the motel industry. So small businesses that were sort of overlooked by so many people in all these parts of America became the perfect opportunity for like this immigrant community to come and kind of make their mark, right? And our story tells the origins of how the first group, which were three guys who were undocumented immigrants, came, to California, worked as migrant workers, and then ended up leasing a motel from a Japanese woman who ended up getting interned in the concentration camps, during World War II. That's how it happened, and how they ended up, how immigration played a role where they were, they opened up these like motels, these like SROs, single room occupancy motels, and they realized that there was a lot of opportunity that if you work hard, you get the loan, you buy, and you can expand because there's so many properties available because nobody wanted them. So they were able to bring in their family members, they were able to bring in friends, and it just became this thing where they were able to help each other out. Because what happened was they would live there, they would work there, and so they owned everything. So it allowed them then to save capital to then buy it somewhere else. And they would buy motels when nobody wanted them in the most podunk, random areas around the country. And I think that created an ecosystem where they saw an opportunity where most people didn't. And, through all these years, they've just built up this almost $400 billion real estate empire where they own more than 60 to 70% of all the hospitality industry in the United States.
Wow.
So for me, go ahead. It's it's one of the most iconic entrepreneurial stories of the last 50 years.
Your work on that film had to be a total passion project since it allowed you, required you, whatever you want to say, to embrace and celebrate your ethnicity as an Indian American. And it seems that the pride that you have in your culture permeates much of your work, including in your books. Do you feel an obligation to educate people about the richness of South Asian culture?
I don't feel I feel it's a privilege to be able to tell these stories, and I feel like it's an honor that I have the platforms to tell these really distinctive, I would call them, they are American stories. Because when I was younger, I didn't really understand or appreciate my culture as much as I do now. And as I kind of look back on it, all of the lessons and all of like the heritage that I inherited from my parents is so important now, right? Because it shows that as different as you are, those things that make you different are also the things that give richness to our American experience. And so I'm very lucky that from what is very specific to me, is very universal to everybody else.
Ever since I first met you, I knew that you were a storyteller at heart. I was aware a long time ago that F. Scott Fitzgerald was someone you greatly admired. I believe Gatsby is your middle name. Well, it's not really, but it could be. And now you followed in his footsteps. He published 4 novels in his lifetime and had a 5th novel published after his death. You're now sitting on 4 with more coming in the future. So, your first story rolled out in 2024 and the third was released earlier in August of 2025. They're the 2/3 of the trilogy targeting the middle school audience called Play the Game. So what were the main storylines, and did they reflect your own experience as a kid who struggled to navigate the minefields of sports, culture, and adolescence?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Fitzgerald was my favorite author since I was 16 years old, and I devoured Gatsby. And I love Fitzgerald as an author. I definitely learned a lot from him as a person, as far as not to drink like a fish like he did. But he wrote beautifully, and I think the lessons that he had about writing and the word. I mean, nobody's inspired me more. on the writing side. But my journey is different. And I think as you grow up, you look back on I couldn't create Gatsby because I didn't grow up in the 20s. I wasn't married to Zelda Fitzgerald. But I also didn't make my 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade basketball team. So those scars from not making the team or getting close to making the team, they never went away. And I think, those ages of like 11 to 17 are the most impressionable. And for me, I always like to say they were like spice jars, right? Where you keep all these different things in and you put them on the shelf. So the beautiful thing as a writer is that you can go to that shelf, you can open up that jar, and you can inhale the scent of what those emotions and those feelings were like. And for me, writing about a character from middle school, so the main protagonist for the Play the Game series is named Ram Patel. Obviously, Ram is an anagram of Amar. I couldn't keep my same last name, but I was able to blend my middle school self with a kid growing up now. The great thing is also having kids around the same age, so you get all of the right lingo of the Gen Alpha vocabulary. But the emotions and the struggles and the relationships, that doesn't change. And so I was able to kind of go back to those, Mike Lupica, those types of sports books that aren't written anymore, and create a niche for myself where I was able to write sports books, but they were more than sports books. They resonated with what kids are going through now. And so I think for me, that journey of writing middle school sports fiction was something I always wanted to do since I was in 5th grade. When I remember I read this Gary Carter sponsored Iron Mask baseball series, and that was like the inspiration for me. And I was like, I want to do this one day. And now I get the privilege of doing that. And then on top of it, writing a graphic novel, which is something I never did before, but I learned how to write a new art form. I mean, kids love graphic novels now, and to be able to hit them right where they are in the sweet spot as far as reading, you're creating readers for life through graphic novels. And that's been the ultimate privilege, is having parents who I'm friends with, having their kids read these books and telling me how much their kids resonate with them.
That's great. So your newest book, Wish I Was a Baller, it's really a memoir about your real life experiences as a kid journalist. It's more than just words on a page. You mentioned all the rich illustrations that depict scenes from your life. Was it easier or more challenging to write about your own life than it was to create, let's say, the Play the Game stories?
Yeah, it was, because some scars are still there, as far as like, you can't just rip the Band-Aid off and expect everything to be healed. But it was really therapeutic to kind of go back and revisit some of the most stressful times of my life, right? I remember there was a scene in the book where I get kicked out of the lunch table by who I thought were my closest friends. And those closest friends still remain my friends to this day. And when I asked them, for historical consistency, what they remembered, I could still tell that I was hurt by it, by their reactions. I think they actually felt, hurt by not doing something at the time. And so we were able to get closure on those things that were sort of gaping. And it was also hard because it was like looking back at the heartbreak, right? The girl that I have a crush on in the book is someone that I'm still friends with now. So to send her this book, and there's this character that she knows, I was like, is she going to like it? What is she going to say? She loved the book, but you're making yourself vulnerable because it's your own life. Whereas you have at least some distance when you can fictionalize a particular scene. Both books are personal, but they're personal in very different ways.
Do you get fan mail from any of the kids who've read your books, or letters or anything?
I am lucky enough that parents will send me, reaction videos from their kids. I had a friend of mine who I haven't seen in years. Her daughter read my entire book series on a road trip and then sent me a video about how much she loved the books and how she wants to be a writer. And she was so happy to see people like her on the cover of these books. And it was really amazing. And of course, when they have ideas about what they want to do with their characters, that's even better.
You know, you've been a content creator on many different platforms, traditional TV, film, animation, publishing. How have your non-writing experiences influenced your ability to tell stories with words written on a page? Do you draw from your TV producer or film director experiences in the way you express yourself with the written word?
Bruce, that's a really good question. I think for me, all of these different mixed mediums that I've worked in all kind of influence the other platforms in a way where if I'm writing something, I'll think about it cinematically, even though I'm not writing a screenplay. But then I can adapt my screenwriting ability to writing prose, or I can take what I'm seeing as a short film and then adapt it to a different medium. Or, because you can tell a story with one word or 100,000 words, one image or entire graphic novel. And I feel that I've had deep experience in all of these different facets, whether it's a tweet or whether it's a memoir or whether it's a film. You can tell stories. And I think you just have to adapt what the platform is telling you to adapt that story for.
So, to an outside observer, it appears that most of your dreams have come true. And in addition to your career, you have a wonderful marriage, you have a nice family, everything you've touched has been successful, but you're way too young to stop dreaming. So, what are some of the goals that you still want to pursue? You did mention you want to do a feature film. So, we know that about you. Any other of the goals that you still would like to pursue, or is that, your North Star at this point?
I have been very, very blessed. Writing a novel, writing 4, getting published, that had been my dream for so long. And so, there's sort of like this, okay, what do I do next? Well, the great thing about life is that you're not necessarily dreaming. Your 10-year-old dreams got accomplished. What are my 40-something dreams? You know what? I'm very lucky. I want to be able to continue to tell stories. I want to make, this Patel short into a full-fledged documentary. Sure, at some point I'd love to have an EGOT. I have the E, but I don't have the I don't have the Grammy, the Oscar, or the Tony, and I can't do anything about that. But those are cool aspirational things. But honestly, Bruce, what it boils down to is I want to continue to tell the ability to tell stories. I would love to create my own media and production company that tells aspirational stories for all different audiences, for all different mediums. That's the goal, is to continue to keep the cycle of storytelling around. And I think that's been my central motif in my life, is to create a volume of stories that everyone can resonate with at different points in their life.
Okay, promo time. Tell us everything else we need to know about your books, including where to buy them. Is there a website our listeners can visit to learn more? Give us your sales pitch so that people know where to get your incredible work.
Absolutely. So you can reach me at amarshahwrites.com. All my book links are there. You can buy them at Amazon. Our Barnes & Nobles has all the books. You can get them from your local library. You can get them from your local bookstore. But they're all available. The Play the Game trilogy is out now. Wish I Was a Baller is out now. The Patel Motel Story is coming soon. I do school visits, so if you want me to come and talk to your kid's school, I can do that. But yeah, so I'm excited that continue to tell stories, continue to be able to make stuff happen, and I'm gonna be as persistent as I was when I was 15, to get there.
Amar, thanks so much for sharing your time and your thoughts with us here at 48 Minutes here on the Believe Network. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. Thanks a lot for being here.
Bruce, it's always a privilege. Thank you, and I appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you, Amar.